The most shocking murder. What if I told you that the perfect neighbor next door buried his wife in the rose garden 12 years ago, and nobody knew until now? We all want to believe our neighborhoods are safe havens. That white picket fence next door, it represents security, normalcy, the American dream. You wave at your neighbors every morning, borrow sugar when you run out, maybe even have barbecues together on weekends. But what happens when that trust gets shattered? When you start noticing things that do not quite add up? Have you ever gotten that crawling feeling under your skin when someone smiles a little too wide, talks a little too smooth? This is the story of Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a 67-year-old widow living in California's Willowbrook Heights. Everyone dismissed her as the paranoid neighbor, you know the type. She had anxiety issues, took medication, spent time in a wellness center after her divorce. When she started making accusations about Dr. Marcus Henderson, the respected heart surgeon who lived next door, people rolled their eyes. Here was this unstable woman pointing fingers at a pillar of the community. But Mrs. Patterson had something most people lack. She paid attention. She noticed patterns. She saw what others refused to see. The question is, can we trust someone society labels as unreliable when she claims to have witnessed murder? Have you ever had that gut feeling about someone, that nagging suspicion that something was not right? Today's story will make you question everything you think you know about the people living right next to you. Because sometimes the most dangerous predators hide behind the most respectable facades, and sometimes the people everyone dismisses are the only ones brave enough to speak the truth. Before we dive into this shocking case, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories like this remind us why we need to stay vigilant in our communities. Trust me, you will not want to miss what happens next. Willowbrook Heights looks exactly like every American suburb you have ever dreamed of living in. Tree-lined streets where children ride bicycles without fear, pristine lawns that could grace magazine covers, houses with fresh paint and flower boxes that bloom on schedule. This is where successful professionals come to raise their families, where property values never drop, where the biggest scandal might be someone forgetting to bring their trash cans in on time. How well do you really know your neighbors? What secrets might be hiding behind those perfectly manicured lawns? Eleanor Patterson moved to Rosewood Avenue 15 years ago. Right after her messy divorce left her emotionally shattered. At 67, she had silver hair always pulled back in a neat bun, sharp green eyes that missed nothing, and a tendency to document everything in her leather-bound notebooks. As the neighborhood watch coordinator, Eleanor took her duties seriously, perhaps too seriously, according to some residents. Her anxiety medication sat prominently on her kitchen counter, a constant reminder of the breakdown that landed her in Riverside Wellness Center 2 years earlier. Next door lived the Henderson family in their 2-story colonial with the award-winning garden. Dr. Marcus Henderson was everything Willowbrook Heights represented. A successful heart surgeon at St. Mary's Hospital, deacon at First Presbyterian Church, and volunteer Little League coach. At 52, he had salt and pepper hair, a warm smile that charmed patients and neighbors alike, and a reputation as the most devoted husband on the block. His wife Victoria was 38, beautiful in that effortless way some women possess. She organized charity drives, hosted book club meetings in their living room, and spent hours nurturing her prize-winning roses. The blood-red blooms were her pride and joy, carefully tended with an almost religious devotion. Victoria was mother to 8-year-old twins Lily and Rose, honor students with their father's charming smile and their mother's thoughtful eyes. But Eleanor remembered when Dr. Henderson was married to someone else entirely. Catherine Henderson had been his first wife, a vibrant woman with auburn hair, who loved gardening just as much as Victoria did now. Catherine had planted those very same rose bushes that Victoria tended so carefully. 12 years ago, Catherine supposedly died in a tragic car accident while visiting her mother in Oregon. The funeral was closed casket, Dr. Henderson explained, because the injuries were too severe. The entire neighborhood mourned the loss of such a lovely young mother. Yet something about that story never sat right with Eleanor. She had been Catherine's friend, had coffee with her every Tuesday morning. Catherine never mentioned having a mother in Oregon. In fact, Catherine once told Eleanor her mother died when she was 16. Appearances can be deceiving, especially in places where perfection is not just expected, it is demanded. Eleanor's concerns began with small things, the kind of details most people would dismiss as coincidence. Dr. Henderson started installing security cameras around his property, not just 1 or 2, but 8 high-definition units that covered every angle of his yard. He told neighbors it was for insurance purposes, but Eleanor noticed how the cameras were positioned to monitor anyone approaching his backyard. Then came the late-night activities. At 2 in the morning, Eleanor would wake to the sound of a shovel hitting dirt. Through her bedroom window, she could see Dr. Henderson's silhouette in the garden, digging by the light of a small flashlight. When she mentioned this to Victoria over the fence the next morning, Victoria would change the subject immediately, her hands trembling as she pruned her roses. Something is not right here, Eleanor thought to herself. Why does a heart surgeon need to garden at 2 in the morning? Why does Victoria jump every time someone mentions Catherine's name? Why do those little girls look terrified whenever their father raises his voice? Victoria was changing too. The confident woman who once led book club discussions now spoke in whispers. She had lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes, and started wearing long sleeves even in the California heat. When Eleanor asked if everything was okay, Victoria would force a smile and insist everything was perfect, absolutely perfect. The twins, Lily and Rose, were exhibiting troubling behaviors as well. These former honor students were falling behind in school, had stopped playing with neighborhood children, and would flinch whenever their father came home from work. Eleanor watched them through her kitchen window, noting how they moved like frightened rabbits, always looking over their shoulders. Have you ever been dismissed when you tried to voice concerns? How frustrating is it when people cannot take you seriously? When Eleanor brought her observations to the other neighbors, they brushed her off completely. Eleanor, you are reading too much into innocent behavior, they would say. Dr. Henderson is a respected member of our community. You need to focus on your own healing instead of creating problems where none exist. The police were even less receptive. Mrs. Patterson, Officer Davis explained patiently, installing security cameras is not illegal, neither is gardening at night. Unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, there is nothing we can investigate. But Eleanor was not going to give up that easily. Eleanor Patterson was not the type of woman to let sleeping dogs lie. Armed with determination and her late husband's old magnifying glass, she began her own investigation into Catherine Henderson's supposed death 12 years earlier. Her first stop was the Willowbrook Heights Public Library, where she spent hours scrolling through archived newspaper articles on the old microfiche machine. The obituary for Catherine Henderson was brief, suspiciously brief. Catherine Marie Henderson, beloved wife and mother, died tragically in a car accident while visiting family in Oregon. She is survived by her husband, Dr. Marcus Henderson, and twin daughters Lily and Rose, age 4. But here was the first inconsistency. Eleanor remembered Catherine mentioning that both her parents had died when she was young. She had been raised by an aunt in Michigan, not Oregon. Eleanor made detailed notes in her leather journal, documenting every discrepancy she discovered. Next, she drove to the Hall of Records downtown, where a helpful clerk named Janet helped her search through police reports from 12 years ago. There was no accident report filed in Oregon involving Catherine Henderson, no death certificate on file in that state either. Eleanor's hands shook as she photocopied every document she could find. The trail led her to St. Mary's Hospital, where Dr. Henderson worked. Posing as a concerned friend planning a memorial garden, Eleanor spoke with several nurses who remembered Catherine. Such a lovely woman, Nurse Rodriguez recalled. She was planning to take the girls on a long vacation that summer. Said she had saved up enough money to start fresh somewhere new. Then suddenly, we heard she had died in an accident. Start fresh somewhere new. Those words echoed in Eleanor's mind as she drove home. Eleanor spent weeks creating a timeline on her dining room table, spreading out newspaper clippings, hospital records, and handwritten notes. The evidence painted a disturbing picture. Catherine had been planning to leave her husband. She had been quietly withdrawing money from their joint accounts. She had even spoken to a divorce attorney just 2 weeks before her alleged death. If you are finding this as disturbing as I am, let me know in the comments below. Have you ever uncovered something shocking about someone you thought you knew? The most chilling discovery came when Eleanor contacted the funeral home that supposedly handled Catherine's services. The director, Mr. Williams, remembered the case clearly. Closed casket service, he explained. Dr. Henderson insisted there would be no viewing due to the severity of the injuries. But here is what struck me as odd. We never actually received a body. Dr. Henderson said the family wanted her cremated in Oregon before transport. Eleanor stared at her timeline, connecting dots with red thread like a detective in a crime show. Catherine Henderson had not died in Oregon. She had not died in a car accident. The question that kept her awake at night was simple but terrifying. If Catherine was not buried in Oregon, where was she? When something feels wrong, persistent investigation often reveals the truth, no matter how disturbing that truth might be. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night in October, 3 months into Eleanor's investigation. She is standing at her kitchen window, unable to sleep again, when she sees him. Dr. Henderson is in the backyard with a shovel, but this time he is not alone. Victoria stands beside him, holding a flashlight that casts long shadows across their faces. They are both staring down at a section of the rose garden, where the soil looks freshly disturbed. Eleanor grabs her binoculars and watches as Victoria drops to her knees beside the disturbed earth. She is crying. Eleanor can see her shoulders shaking even from this distance. Dr. Henderson places his hand on Victoria's shoulder, but instead of comfort, the gesture looks like a warning. The next morning, Eleanor notices something that makes her blood run cold. Victoria is loading suitcases into her car trunk, but she keeps looking over her shoulder toward the house like a scared animal checking for predators. The twins sit in the back seat, their faces pale and frightened. Eleanor hurries outside, pretending to water her flowers near the fence that separates their properties. That is when she hears the conversation that changes everything. "You cannot leave." Dr. Henderson's voice carries across the yard, calm but threatening. "You know too much about Catherine now." Victoria's response is barely a whisper, but Eleanor catches every word. "I found her journal, Marcus. I know what you did to her. I know why you really buried her in my garden." "Our garden," he corrects her. "And Catherine chose her fate when she tried to take my daughters away from me, just like you are choosing yours now. What would you do if you discovered your spouse was a murderer? How do you escape when you are trapped with someone who has already killed once?" Eleanor's hands tremble as she realizes the full horror of the situation. Victoria knows her husband murdered his first wife. She knows Catherine is buried beneath the roses she has been tending for years. And now Dr. Henderson is threatening Victoria with the same fate. The suitcases in Victoria's car are not for a family vacation. They represent a desperate escape attempt, one that Dr. Henderson clearly has no intention of allowing. Eleanor watches as Victoria slowly removes the suitcases from her trunk, her movements mechanical and defeated. The twins climb out of the car, their young faces already showing the trauma of living with a monster who masquerades as their loving father. In that moment, Eleanor Patterson realizes she is the only person who can save Victoria and those children from becoming Dr. Henderson's next victims. 3 days after witnessing the confrontation, Eleanor finds Victoria sitting on her front porch at dawn, clutching a cup of coffee with shaking hands. The twins are still sleeping inside, and Dr. Henderson has already left for the hospital. "Mrs. Patterson," Victoria whispers, "I need to tell someone before it is too late." Victoria's story pours out in broken fragments. She had married Dr. Henderson 5 years ago, believing she was giving Lily and Rose the stable father figure they needed after their mother's tragic death. He was charming, attentive, everything a grieving family could want. But the charm was a carefully constructed mask. The psychological manipulation started slowly. Dr. Henderson would question Victoria's memory, making her doubt her own perceptions. He monitored her phone calls, controlled their finances, and isolated her from friends and family. When she expressed concerns about his behavior, he would remind her of her dependence on him. She had no job, no money, nowhere to go with 2 children. "He made me feel like I was going crazy," Victoria explains, tears streaming down her face, just like he probably did to Catherine. The truth about Catherine emerged by accident. While cleaning out the basement storage room, Victoria discovered a loose floorboard that concealed Catherine's personal journal. Page after page documented years of abuse, threats, and Dr. Henderson's escalating violence. The final entries revealed Catherine's desperate plan to escape with the twins. The last entry was dated the night Catherine supposedly died in Oregon. Victoria realized she had been living in a dead woman's house, sleeping in her bed, raising her children, tending her roses, all while Catherine's body lay buried beneath the garden she lovingly maintained. "I tried to give her a proper burial," Victoria admits. "Those nights you saw me digging, I was trying to move her remains to the cemetery where she belongs, but Marcus caught me. That is when he told me exactly what happened to Catherine, and what would happen to me if I ever tried to leave." The fear in Victoria's eyes is unmistakable. She knows her husband is a killer, and she knows she could be next. Believing survivors and supporting those in danger requires courage, the courage to act when someone's life depends on it. This is where Eleanor Patterson had to make the most important decision of her life. Eleanor knew that calling the police again would be an uphill battle. Her previous 17 calls about suspicious activity had earned her a reputation as the neighborhood's paranoid troublemaker. Officer Davis would probably hang up the moment he heard her voice. But this time, she had Victoria. Together, they spent 2 days gathering concrete evidence. Victoria provided Catherine's hidden journal, photographs of the disturbed soil in the rose garden, and documentation of Dr. Henderson's threats. Eleanor contributed her detailed timeline, the inconsistencies in Catherine's supposed death, and months of careful observations. Most importantly, Victoria agreed to wear a recording device during her next conversation with Dr. Henderson. The recording was damning. Dr. Henderson's voice, calm and calculated, admitting to burying Catherine beneath the roses, his threats against Victoria if she ever tried to leave, his chilling description of how Catherine chose her fate when she planned to take the twins away. Armed with this evidence, Eleanor called Detective Morrison at the county sheriff's office. This time, they listened. "Mrs. Patterson," Detective Morrison said after reviewing their materials, "this is substantial enough for a search warrant. We will need both you and Mrs. Henderson to testify about what you have witnessed." The search warrant was executed on a Thursday morning. Eleanor watched through her kitchen window as police cars filled Rosewood Avenue. Neighbors emerged from their houses, shocked to see their peaceful street transformed into a crime scene. Dr. Henderson arrived home from the hospital to find his backyard crawling with investigators. His reaction was telling. No surprise, no outrage at the invasion of his property. Just cold, calculating assessment of the situation. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked Detective Morrison, his voice steady. "We have reason to believe human remains may be buried on your property, specifically in the Rose Garden area." For the first time, Eleanor saw Dr. Henderson's mask slip. His eyes darted toward Victoria, who stood beside the detective with her arms wrapped protectively around Lily and Rose. The twins clung to their mother, finally safe from the monster who had terrorized their family for years. The excavation team arrived with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. The German shepherd named Rex immediately alerted to a specific section of the rose garden, exactly where Eleanor had seen Dr. Henderson digging those countless nights. This is the moment that changes everything. Before we reveal what they found in that rose garden, smash that like button if you believe in the power of speaking up for what is right. The tension in the air was suffocating, as investigators began carefully removing layers of soil. Eleanor found herself holding her breath, praying they would find the evidence needed to put Dr. Henderson away forever. Victoria squeezed Eleanor's hand as the excavation continued. "Thank you for believing me," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up." After 3 hours of painstaking work, Detective Morrison's radio crackled to life. "We have located human remains," came the voice from the garden. "Adult female, consistent with 12-year burial time frame." Dr. Henderson's face went completely white. The perfect facade finally crumbled as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The forensic team worked with methodical precision, carefully documenting every layer of soil they removed from Victoria's prized rose garden. Yellow crime scene tape now surrounded the Henderson property, transforming the once pristine suburban paradise into the center of a murder investigation. Catherine Henderson's remains were discovered exactly where Eleanor had suspected, beneath the largest bush of blood-red roses, in a makeshift grave that had been her hidden tomb for 12 long years. The forensic anthropologist confirmed what everyone feared: blunt force trauma to the skull, defensive wounds on the hands, and evidence of a sedative in the bone marrow that Dr. Henderson had access to through his medical practice. "How does it feel when everyone finally believes what you have been saying all along?" Eleanor stood behind the police barrier, watching as her months of investigation were finally validated. The same neighbors who had dismissed her concerns now gathered in stunned silence, their faces reflecting disbelief and shame. Mrs. Garcia, who lived 3 houses down, approached Eleanor with tears in her eyes. "I owe you an apology," Mrs. Garcia whispered. "We all do. You were trying to protect that family, and we made you feel like you were losing your mind." The forensic evidence continued to mount against Dr. Henderson. Catherine's DNA was found under her fingernails, indicating she had fought desperately for her life. The sedative discovered in her remains was traced to Dr. Henderson's medical supplies from 12 years ago. Most damning of all, Catherine's journal, hidden in the basement, contained detailed accounts of his threats and her growing fear for her safety. Detective Morrison addressed the crowd of neighbors that had gathered. "This investigation demonstrates the importance of community vigilance. Sometimes the people we dismiss as overly cautious are the ones brave enough to speak truth when others remain silent." Eleanor felt a complex mix of vindication and profound sadness. She had been right about Dr. Henderson, but being right meant Catherine Henderson had suffered a horrific death while everyone around her remained oblivious to the danger. Victoria stood with her arms around Lily and Rose, finally free from the man who had terrorized their family. The twins would need years of therapy to recover from living with their mother's killer, but at least they were safe now. The importance of trusting your instincts cannot be overstated. When something feels wrong, when behavior does not match the presented facade, when your gut tells you danger is present, listen to that inner voice. Eleanor Patterson trusted her instincts even when everyone else told her she was wrong. Sometimes being the person who refuses to stay silent is the difference between justice and a killer walking free. Dr. Marcus Henderson's trial began 6 months after Catherine's remains were discovered. The courtroom was packed with Willowbrook Heights residents who had once considered him a pillar of their community. Local news stations covered every day of proceedings, broadcasting the shocking details of a murder that had hidden in plain sight for over a decade. Victoria's testimony proved to be the most compelling evidence against her husband. With quiet strength, she described years of psychological manipulation, the discovery of Catherine's journal, and Dr. Henderson's chilling confession about burying his first wife beneath the roses she had planted. "He told me Catherine chose her fate when she tried to take his daughters away," Victoria testified, her voice steady despite visible trembling. "He said I would face the same consequences if I ever tried to leave with the children." Eleanor Patterson took the witness stand as the key investigator who had refused to accept the lies. The defense attorney tried to discredit her testimony by highlighting her mental health history and medication use, but the physical evidence spoke louder than any character assassination. Mrs. Patterson's vigilance saved lives, Prosecutor Williams stated during closing arguments. While this community chose to look the other way, she chose to seek truth. Her persistence brought justice to Catherine Henderson and protection to Victoria and her children. The jury deliberated for only 2 days before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, tampering with evidence, witness intimidation, and domestic violence charges that would ensure Dr. Henderson spent the rest of his life behind bars. As the judge read the life sentence without possibility of parole, Dr. Henderson showed no emotion. He had worn his mask of respectability for so long that even facing justice, he could not reveal his true nature. The Willowbrook Heights community faced a difficult reckoning with their blind trust in appearances. Property values dropped as the neighborhood grappled with the reality that they had lived next door to a killer for 12 years. Many residents sought therapy to process their guilt over dismissing Eleanor's concerns. Eleanor received formal recognition from the county sheriff's department for her role in solving a cold case that had never been officially opened. But this story is not just about one man's crimes. Victoria Henderson and her daughters entered witness protection 6 months after the trial concluded. They now live under new identities in a small coastal town, where Victoria works as a librarian and tends a modest garden behind her rented cottage. The roses she grows there are white, a symbol of new beginnings rather than the blood-red blooms that concealed her predecessor's grave. Eleanor Patterson became something of a local hero. Though she never sought the attention, the county sheriff's department presented her with a civilian service award, and several true crime podcasts featured her story. More importantly, her neighbors began treating her with the respect she had always deserved. The dynamics of Willowbrook Heights changed permanently after Dr. Henderson's conviction. Residents started paying closer attention to each other, asking more questions, and trusting their instincts when something felt wrong. The Neighborhood Watch program expanded, with Eleanor serving as its respected leader. What would you have done in Eleanor Patterson's situation? The lessons from this case extend far beyond one suburban street. Perfect facades often hide dark secrets, and the most respectable members of our communities can harbor the most dangerous intentions. When someone displays troubling behavior, when stories do not add up, when your gut tells you something is amiss, listen to that inner voice. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even when everyone else dismisses your concerns. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, especially when they are trapped in dangerous situations. Support survivors and believe their stories, even when those stories challenge our comfortable assumptions about the people around us. Eleanor Patterson's courage saved lives because she refused to stay silent. She understood that being labeled as paranoid or unstable was a small price to pay for protecting innocent people from a killer. The house on Rosewood Avenue remains empty, its for sale sign weathered by 2 years of changing seasons. But Eleanor still lives next door, still watches, still listens, because someone has to bear witness to the truth, even when that truth makes others uncomfortable. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to look away. The story of Eleanor Patterson and the Henderson family teaches us that evil often hides behind the most ordinary facades. A respected heart surgeon, a beautiful suburban home, prize-winning roses, all concealing a murder that went undetected for 12 years. But this case also demonstrates the extraordinary power of one person who refuses to stay silent. Eleanor could have ignored her suspicions, dismissed her concerns as anxiety, or accepted the community's judgment that she was being paranoid. Instead, she chose to investigate, to document, to persist even when everyone told her she was wrong. Her courage saved Victoria Henderson and her children from becoming the next victims. Her vigilance brought justice to Catherine Henderson, whose voice had been silenced but whose story finally emerged from beneath those blood-red roses. The lessons are clear. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, believe survivors when they reach out for help, and never underestimate the impact of speaking up for what is right. Your observations matter, your concerns are valid, your willingness to act could be the difference between life and death for someone living in fear. Community safety is not the responsibility of law enforcement alone. It requires all of us to pay attention, to care about our neighbors, and to refuse to look away when something seems wrong. This story proves that one person can make a difference when they refuse to stay silent. If this case taught you something valuable, subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex for more true crime stories that matter. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. And remember, your voice matters, your instincts matter, and speaking up can save lives. Eleanor Patterson proved that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to give up.